Hi, my name is Tony Robles. Welcome to Listen and Be Heard Radio for Readers and Writers, and welcome to the Audio Garden. Today we have a special guest. Memoirs are so popular nowadays with readers, a wide readership that gravitate towards memoirs. There was a memoir that came out in 2006, written by a man whose home was Livingston, uh, California. His name was Peter Jamero. His book, it was the lovely, lovely book called Growing Up Brown, published by University of Washington Press. We have the honor and privilege of having his sister, Luna Jamero, with us today as a guest. Luna, welcome to Listen and Be Heard. Welcome to the Audio Garden.
Well, thank you for having me, Tony. It's really an honor and privilege to be interviewed, especially to highlight my late brother's accomplishment in his book, his memoir of Growing Up Brown, which I will be reading an excerpt from whenever we're ready.
Yeah,
But
yes.
yes, our family is still healing from my brother's passing, but he left such a huge legacy for all of us, not only for our family, but for our community and Filipino Americans. So I'm glad that I was part of his life. I hope I can share with
Yes.
your audience what might be enlightening.
Growing up brown, it pretty much says it all. Memoirs of a Filipino American, and I'm going to just read a part from the back here. It's an excerpt where Peter says, "I may have been like other boys, but there was a major difference. My family included 80 to 100 single young men residing in a Filipino labor camp. It was as a campo boy that I first learned of my ancestral roots and the sometimes torturous path that Filipinos took in sailing halfway around the world to the promise that was America. It was as a campo boy that I first learned the values of family, community, hard work, and education. And as a campo boy, I also began to see two faces of America, a place where Filipinos were at once welcomed and excluded, were considered equal, and were discriminated against. It was a place where the values of fairness and freedom often fell short when Filipinos put them to the test. Talk about growing up, his life, your life, being, on the camp or in the campo.
Well, first of all, there was a 13-year difference between my brother Pete and myself,
Mhm.
and a 16-year age difference between my youngest brother, Joe. So, we actually, as children, didn't grow up with my brother Pete. We knew of him, but we really got to know him more uh, when he was an adult and when he got married, of course. But I have some childhood memories of him, but they're very vague. I know my mother was very proud of him. He was in the Navy during the time I was like around 6 years old. And I remember him coming home on leave, and that was probably the first time I actually um, got to know him.
Hmm.
And as and through the years, of course, I've probably been in every home that he and Terry, his wife and family, lived in, from all the way from Sacramento to Washington D.C. to Seattle and then back to California. So I was always a part of their life. I think my brother Pete always wanted to involve his family and whatever and wherever he could. So we were a close knit family, and of course, in our retirement years, we got a lot closer. And Pete had shared. We both share. Uh, very common political views, very common social community issue views. So, he will be missed. And I think to honor him in this way is honoring all of us as Filipino Americans. So if you'd like me to read, I
Well,
did
I just
pick a
yeah. Oh, no problem. If we could just maybe I just had a few more questions I wanted to ask. Um, with memoir, we're looking at a book that's written from the point of view of somebody who's lived a life and some of the things that they've had to overcome, some of the challenges. In reading the book and the chapters or the excerpts that you've read, was there anything in the book that surprised you? Anything, any passages
no.
that surprised you or was
I
it?
think yeah, some of the experiences that he had when he was especially um breaking that ceiling and being the first among a lot of the administrative positions that he held. I He never really discussed that real painful feeling with us as much as he put in detail. I mean, he did mention the fact that he was a victim of racism. He talked of how when he would show up at a hotel to check in to the hotel, they never, they would dismiss who he was. They would act as if he wasn't part of the group that he was with. He he had to pretty much explain himself. And so, yeah, that was one of the things. The more the depth that he went into in his book of the real emotional pain he felt of that kind of exclusion. And so, but I mean, we were aware of it, but he never dwelled on it with us. He was just our brother. When he came home to visit us, he didn't dwell on a lot of those things, and we knew he had very important titles, but he never was one to make us feel like we just couldn't talk to him like a brother, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So he was very humble in that respect. So yeah, I was not shocked, to read once he did detail. I read in his book how much uh, prejudice he had experienced. I too had, gone through, but maybe not at the level he did. So it wasn't a new experience, but um, I think he described for a lot of Filipino Americans something that they could not really discuss openly. So I think it was very enlightening for him to open up in that way because it did allow other people to kind of maybe have some kind of closure, maybe to those kind of feelings that made them feel they weren't good enough. And I think Pete's book, for many of us Filipino Americans, validated who we were. So
I'm really glad that you said that because there are a lot of folks that I'm sure were touched by the memoir. And the thing is, it is a memoir, but on the other hand, it's kind of a it's kind of a history lesson as well,
yeah,
Filipino American history. And the
exactly.
way he speaks and writes of the the generation that came before him, the Manong and the Manang generation that immigrated here from the Philippines in the early days, the memories and the loving way in which he speaks and writes of them. Um, maybe you could touch a little bit on maybe some of the values that he got from being around these folks that worked the land and were away from home, and many of them never returned to the Philippines. They stayed here and passed on in later years.
Yeah, we shared many of those cherished memories growing up with a lot of the bachelor manongs that came to our camp every year, every season. And I mean, I remember as a young child, we would often wonder where they went after they left our camp because they were like family, and I used to we'd sit on their laps, they'd laugh, they'd sing with us. They were like our family. So when they would leave, I always kind of felt that emptiness because they were our uncles. And as Pete mentioned in his book, they were um, very much a part of shaping who we were as people. Um, they taught us a lot of in terms of compassion. These lessons we were not knowing that those were lessons that they were
Mm,
giving, but yet through osmosis, just through the fact that they were who they were, they treated us with such kindness, but yet we could see that they did not have what we had. They did not have a family. So, we had empathy for them, we had love for them. These are lessons that we learn, maybe not intentionally, but those are lessons that I remember well, as my brother Pete points out in his book. So, yeah, I mean, we had there were. I used to look at some of the our 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 revered Manongs that came to our camp every year, and some of them would remind me of I don't know if you remember Damon Runyon. He had some really colorful characters,
mm,
and
right,
and
right.
some of the Manongs that we had, they reminded me so much of some of these um very lovable characters. We had one Uncle Deloy who used to always tell a story about uh, he had this growth in his hand. It was a benign tumor, but it looked like a little golf ball that was in his hand. And for years he would tell us it was his anting anting, which is good luck in Filipino, right?
Mm, yeah.
So when he got older, the doctors finally said, you need to get it removed. And so he was very, very suspicious about that. And he was also an alcoholic, but
Mm,
he
yeah.
was he was he was one of the he started to get out of control in terms of his drinking. But when he had that surgery on his hand, he told me, he said, I told you that this was my anting anting, and now it's gone, and now I have bad luck. But
Oh, man.
he was he always, and then we had our Uncle Apong who was like, all of maybe four or five if that, and he was the keeper of our pool hall. And so, he had what we thought was blue eyes, but actually what he had was cataracts. We didn't
Oh,
know
okay.
that he had cataracts, but his eyes always looked blue. But he used to always whistle and sing, and he was often teased by the other men because he was very slow. My father and mother never put him out in the field. They always gave him jobs to do around the camp. So he was a big part of my life. He also was my babysitter. So,
Mm,
and these are the same Manongs that Pete grew up with too, because by the time I was coming up, they already were in their late 70s and still working out in the fields.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, the way your brother writes about them, lovingly, it's very personal. It says that all of the Manongs had nicknames that corresponded to some maybe physical characteristic or tick or some other thing. Your father apparently um, I think he was a contractor, and
Yes.
he I guess negotiated labor contracts on behalf of the farm workers. Um, but I guess it was different because I guess in Stockton and other places like that, the farms were owned by bigger companies, whereas in Livingston, they were more family oriented. So the
Yes.
relationship was a lot closer. Can you talk about that? Because that's really important that, your father, as your brother portrays in the book, really looked out for the best interest of the workers.
Yes, he did. And of course, he was a migrant worker himself, starting off, so he knew the kind of conditions that they lived in, and so uh, the farmers that were in the Livingston, Belico, Atwater, Winton, Merced County area were a majority of them, if not all, I think all of them that my father uh, contracted with were small farmers. They were small time owned by themselves, not like the corporations that owned the grape vineyards in Delano and
Yeah.
some of the big asparagus uh, industry in the Stockton area. So in our area, my father was able to establish a personal relationship with, there were white farmers that he dealt with, and even Japanese
Mm,
farmers that he dealt with, and Mennonites. I don't know if you're familiar with the Mennonites, but the
yeah.
Mennonites had farms as well. And through the years, my father, had a lot, gained and earned a lot of respect from them because he was, and I, as a little girl, I used to watch him talking to the farmers, not really knowing what he was really trying to do, but I would clearly understand that he was representing the needs of his farm workers because I would see Papa shaking his head, not good enough, that kind of thing. And they go back and forth, and then they'd end up shaking hands. So, they came back every year, every harvest season, because Papa always guaranteed that they would always do the work. They always showed up. They did good work for the farmers. And so everybody, I mean, succeeded because my father was able to negotiate and keep his word. And that's a lot when it comes to business.
I know that your family, I think both your father and your mother came from the same town in the Philippines, Garcia Hernandez.
Yes,
Um,
and behold,
yeah, were Peter or Herb or any of the siblings ever able to travel back there to see it?
yes. I went back in 1971 with Pete and Terry and my parents, and Herb and my brother George and Pete and Terry and some of their children went back in 1986. So yeah, we've established a close connection with our family back in Garcia Hernandez, and even before I even went to the Philippines, Mama and Papa were always sending clothes or sending letters, or always kept in touch with their family in Garcia Hernandez. So uh, we were very much aware of how they grew up and their roots. Although they used to talk more about Garcia Hernandez and their growing up years there more than they talked about the hardships they faced when they came here to America during the 1920s.
Hmm.
So that we always thought that was, they romanticized a lot of their growing up years, for one thing, and but did not share with us that much about the hardships. I mean, my mother would often talk about the fact that she sacrificed so much for us, but we didn't really know what all that meant. We just kept on hearing that same thing. I sacrificed everything for you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so which is so typical of a lot of Filipino mothers, for one thing.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
in the book, a lot of the themes are kind of back to the land because I know that Peter had been in Washington, he'd been in a lot of different places, assumed a lot of different positions of employment, was very active in his own way in matters of just trying to get more equity and more justice. Um, to quote Fred Cordova, who was the founder of the Filipino American National Historic Society, in the book, they say you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country. You can't take the country out of the boy. Um, so, I mean, when all is said and done, I guess, he was a country boy, right? I mean, I mean, can you talk about that and how as it relates to something that he refers to in the book? this deep construct, or this deep thing, this deep feeling in our culture, this thing called bayanihan. If you could talk to, just maybe speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, and Pete, despite all the accomplishments he had, despite the fact that he was a trailblazer, despite the fact that he traveled in very sophisticated arenas that many of us in the Livingston area were not aware of. Um, whenever when he came home, he was very humble. He was always very humble, and he believed in community spirit. He believed in he did not like people that boasted. I remember one of the things that he used to say about some of the people we knew, and I don't know if familiar with the word but it's a Visayan word that meaning that a lot of they're just full of themselves, and Pete tried very hard not to be that way. He was very open to people, and I think that's um, what really inspired a lot of people to believe in what he could do, and it helped him along the way. So yeah, I he was never somebody that came to think that he was better than anybody else because of his accomplishments. If nothing else, my brother always strived to be a better person. And that's how I always remember him. And I mean, he was even after several years after he had already retired, and shortly after his wife Terry passed away, he told me that he started seeing a therapist. And I asked him why. And I said, because I'm wondering, why would you, a man of such accomplishments, think you need to be a better man? And he just felt personally that he wanted to feel better about himself. And I think that's a tribute to the kind of person that he wanted to be remembered as, because it wasn't all those other accomplishments he had. It was the fact that he wanted to be remembered as a loving, kind, compassionate person. And that's how he always was to us, and how I always will remember him.
Yeah, the vulnerability in that, opening yourself up, wanting to be a better man, going out and seeking therapy to try to unload and make sense of those things. In the same way, in a memoir, you're looking back at the past, and then in looking at the past, you're seeing the present with new eyes, and you're also kind of forging a vision of the future, which, if people can read this, can help us along in our journey, knowing that there was an elder here that had experienced these different things and knew that things were going to come down the pike, and that this could be a guide for us growing up brown, for other people who aren't brown, who want to know what it's like for brown people growing up in society. Um, One of the things that I mentioned is that people from this particular generation, Peter Jamero's generation, had a very gentle kind of sensibility when it came to their writing. When it came to their writing, so something about that particular generation, don't know what it is, but it's very, very hard to replicate, if it could be replicated at all. Just a gentle sensibility, but a strong sensibility at the same time. Um, I know that you wanted to read from it. We're going to do that, but I wanted to ask you one more question. Peter did write another book. It was called The Bridge Generation, and I think it was published by the same publisher, University of Washington Press. And that kind of dives into the generation of Filipinos that were born here, I guess around World War II, the World War II era. Can you maybe just talk a little bit about, maybe just talk a little bit about that before you read the excerpt?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm part of that bridge generation because these were Filipino Americans that were born to at least one parent of Filipino descent before 1945, I believe it was.
Mm,
But um, but the bridge generation, he coined that. He coined that uh, definition, I think, and it became more known by people at the 1994 Filipino American National Historical Society conference in San Francisco, and wherever and whenever he could, he would always highlight who we were as Bridge Generation because he felt that we were that bridge between the Manong and Manong generation that didn't quite get the kind of recognition that we deserved, but yet um, we were able to straddle two cultures and we're able to take advantage of the opportunities, educational and career opportunities that our parents never really realized. So I think it was important for him to highlight the fact that we should have all been proud of who we were as Bridge Generation. He gave voice to that for many of us.
yeah.
Um,
And having uncles of that generation, many of whom have passed on, I just felt that that was an important statement and just a very important thing for for Peter to have put out there that that this was a generation that experienced certain certain things that were particular to that generation. Again, this is Growing Up Brown, uh, the memoirs of a Filipino American by Peter Jamero. With us today, you have the honor and privilege and pleasure of having Luna Jamero, his younger sister, who is going to read an excerpt from this memoir.
yeah, I'm just going to read a very short section, which is part of Pete's the preface. I went, it was kind of a sentimental journey again for me to go back through his book because I had read it, of course, but hadn't read it recently, and kind of was reminded again of how much time and heart he gave to this book, but and to his memoirs. But I'm just going to read briefly, since we were talking about bridge generation. Um, these are quote his words. I coined the word. I coined the term bridge generation for the young. For the let me get my. No, I don't have enough light on here.
All
Hold on.
right.
Okay. When you're old, you got to have more light.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I know.
So anyway, here I go. So I'm going to just back up again. Again, quoting my brother from his book, The Growing Up Brown. I coined the term bridge generation for the 1994 FONS conference to describe children born before 1946 with at least one parent who was a Filipino pioneer. Members of the bridge generation are now in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, also 90s. It is my sincere hope that my memoirs of growing up brown in America will become a small part of the larger and more important process of documenting the history of the bridge generation. Readers may wonder why I chose to use the phrase growing up brown as the title of this book. From the beginning of European settlement in America, color has been a adjective word to describe supposedly inferior non-Caucasians. Those of African ancestry were derided as blacks, Asians from the Far East were the Yellow Peril. Native Americans were called red savages, and Filipinos were brown monkeys. By the time of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, these descriptions had taken on a more positive connotation. Growing up brown was coined by Seattle activists Fred and Dorothy Cordova in an effort to differentiate Filipinos from their Chinese, Korean, and Japanese brothers and sisters. The phrase received wide acceptance at the first national conference and what later became the FONS in 1987 and has been a workshop fixture at every FONS conference since. I believe that growing up brown is a perfect description of my life experiences as a Filipino in America. It captures the heart of being likened to an ape, of being considered inferior to whites, of being excluded from social societies, of being ashamed of my color, and of being discriminated against in employment and housing. Brown also encompasses my subsequent pride in my ethnicity and finally in who I am as a Filipino American. Interspersed throughout these memoirs are comments on national and world events, civil rights issues, the New York Yankees, jazz, and Filipino American history. Their significance to me is important. Next to my family, they are topics of great personal interest. With undying love for my family and deep respect for all Filipinos who have called America home. Peter Jamero, 2006.
Right. Thank you so much. And Peter was instrumental in the forming of the Filipino American National Historical Society. Worked, I guess he was the vice president of the national uh, arm or chapter of that. Um, his book, Growing Up Brown, again published in 2006, uh, can be gotten. You can get this book from University of Washington Press at uwapress.uw.edu. But just look up University of Washington Press on online, and you'll get it. Also, if you want to learn more about Peter, he had a monthly
Wow.
newsletter. Yeah, he had a blog called Peter's Pinoy Patter.
Yes.
Triple
Hmm.
P. I love that. And
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because I did want to address his blog. Uh, Pete wrote his November blog, November 2024, which was his last blog. He was able to write that, and so people can now access it. There was a problem with the server, but that internal error has now been resolved. But I'm just so thankful that he was able to still share with us right to the very end because he passed away November 22nd. He completed that blog just around the first part of November. And so hopefully people can continue to access it. For now, the family is still in they're trying to decide what direction they want to take his blog in the future, either to continue it somewhat or to close it. That decision hasn't been made.
yes, I mean, I have it here on my phone, so you can still get it right now. PeterJamero.net, and Jamero
Yes.
is spelled Jamero. PeterJamero.net. Um, the blog. I receive the blog every month. Has stories about Peter's take on the different things that are happening in politics, in entertainment, and also about the bridge generation. Focuses on the bridge generation personality of the month. Um, among other things. Once again, Luna Jamero, thank you so much for being with us. We want to make sure that you know that people know about growing up brown, that if there's an educator out there that um, can use this book, I would highly recommend it to be used in schools so that we can better understand our communities and our history. Again, this is Tony Robles, and this is Listen and Be Heard Radio for readers and writers. Luna Jamero, thank you for taking a walk with us in the audio garden. The fragrance of Livingston and of Oakdale and of the Campo and of the Manongs and the memory and the poetry and the music of your life and the life of Peter is wonderful and beautiful. And I thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
And thank you for having me, Tony.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to send this to Martha, our producer, and sometimes they just have to clean up the audio or whatever, or maybe just do a few edits. But I will let you know when this goes to when we broadcast it. And if you could share it with everybody, that would be that would be fantastic. Um, that more people can get a chance to. And I'm still, I've gotten halfway through the memoir. I'm going to continue reading it. My father's really digging it. He lives in Hawaii, and he was saying, "Man, this
Yeah,
guy, this guy ain't no joke, man."
yeah, yeah.
So anyway, so
Yeah.
Luna,
But I
so
thank you on behalf of Pete's family as well as my family. Uh, the entire Jamero family thanks you for sharing our brother to a wider audience. So thank
hey,
you
and,
again.
and thank you. And there was another elder that passed fairly recently, I think a little bit before Peter, um, and that would have been Joe Talogan down in Guadalupe. I don't know if you knew Joe, but
What was his name?
Joe Talogan.
Oh, of course, I knew Joe. Joe and Marge Logan. Yeah,
He just passed away, I think, probably maybe
yeah, he did.
a month prior, and he left us a wonderful gift too, called Mestizo Through My Eyes, his memoir. I don't know if you got a chance to read that. That's a really really tremendous book as well, But Luna, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking time and being so gracious with us. And I'll make sure to contact you once we get that link. I'll be sure to send that to you. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Your thing, no problem. You
I'll
take
hear
care.
from you.
All right.
Okay,
All right
bye
now.
bye.
Take care.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you too
All
now.
right.